I thought the dangerous moments at amusement parks were the drops, the speed, the height, but these stories prove me wrong. Hi, I'm Nathan. Today I'm sharing the horrifying amusement park deaths. From a girl who turned a water slide into a competition she couldn't quit to a maintenance worker who stepped onto the track during a routine check and never made it back. It was July 18, 2016, inside an indoor water park in Ohio, where the air felt heavy with humidity, and the constant sound of rushing water echoed through the enclosed structure. The lighting barely changed, giving the place a controlled, almost artificial atmosphere. Lines moved steadily, and riders kept entering slides without pause. Haley Vant was 19, working a part-time job, and had come to the park with co-workers after a late shift. She had energy even after long days, the kind of person who kept things going when others were ready to leave. That night it was her, but there was something more specific driving her. Earlier she had timed one run on the enclosed body slide, fast enough to turn into a small competition. Quick glances at phones, laughing claims about the best time. She wanted one more run to beat it. They had gone through several attractions, but she kept returning to that same enclosed slide. It was fully covered, around 180 feet long, with tight curves. Earlier, staff noted the water flow wasn't as strong. It had been reduced due to a partial blockage, but the ride remained open. Riders were spaced manually. At one point in line, someone mentioned the slide felt slower. She heard it and chose to go anyway, even joking she'd push off harder to make up for it. By the time she reached the front again, spacing wasn't consistent. The rider ahead entered slowly and didn't build enough momentum. What happened next had to be pieced together. No one outside saw it in real time. She entered feet first, pushing off harder than before, gaining speed at first. But deeper into the slide, reduced water flow started to matter. Friction increased, slowing her earlier than expected. You can feel the shift before it fully happens. The speed drops early, the sound of water changes. The slide doesn't carry the way it should. As she came around one bend, she hit the rider ahead, hard. A sudden stop that folded her forward into the curve. That was it, the exact moment everything locked in place. From here, there was no clean way out. The rider ahead had stalled. Now both were stuck in a tight section with no movement. Within seconds, it escalated. Another rider entered behind her, unaware, and slammed into the same bottleneck. The space compressed instantly. What had been a delay became a full blockage. Haley's position shifted from the impact. Her upper body forced forward and twisted. There was nowhere to go. Someone behind, someone in front, hard walls on both sides. Then the water kept coming. Instead of carrying them forward, the water pushed into the block section, hitting them in uneven bursts. It wasn't enough to move anyone. She tried to move, but there was no space. The curve and the other riders kept her in place. From there, she couldn't reposition. Her breathing became uneven as water kept getting in the way. She couldn't get a full breath. Inside the enclosed tube, sound didn't carry well. Any calls for help stayed inside. At the top, dispatch continued briefly before operators realized riders weren't exiting on time. Once operators stopped sending riders, they initiated a check. Maintenance accessed the slide, but it still took minutes to reach the blockage. By the time they reached her, she was unresponsive. She was removed, and responders attempted resuscitation, but she was later pronounced dead. The findings pointed not to classic positional asphyxia, but to compressive restriction and water-related airway compromise during the pileup. She couldn't get effective breaths while intermittently inhaling water, trapped with no way to recover, made worse by the delay. The review pointed to reduced water flow, inconsistent spacing, and delayed recognition. The slide was closed and procedures were adjusted. And honestly, this is the part that stays with me. Nothing about this started as dangerous. It was routine. Until the exact moment, it wasn't. That situation only worked because something slowed down when it wasn't supposed to. But a year later, at a traveling fair in Texas, nothing slowed at all. The ride reached full speed exactly as designed. And that's the moment a single connector failed. It was October 3rd, 2017, at a traveling fairground in Texas where the air felt warm and slightly humid, carrying the mix of food stands, dust, and machinery running non-stop. The ground was packed dirt, worn down by constant foot traffic, and the lights from the rides flickered against the darkening sky. Everything about the place felt temporary, assembled quickly, and expected to keep moving. Lyra Scoff was 24 years old, working freelance and building a visual portfolio centered around motion, specifically how things move under stress. She was drawn to the physics of it, the way force reveals itself in structure. That night, she was at the fair, partly to enjoy it, but partly to study it. She had her camera, and she was looking. That detail matters more than it seems. She spent the early part of the evening observing rides before riding them. She watched how things moved, clocked the rhythm of cycles, noticed the way certain structures handled load. It was habit. She approached everything with that kind of attention. She eventually made her way to a chair swing near the center of the fairground, a rotating ride with suspended seats attached by chains, lifting riders outward as it gained speed. The structure stood about 40 feet tall, and at full operation, the chairs extended outward at a steep angle. She chose one of the outer seats, specifically for the arc. From that position, she'd told a friend earlier, you could feel the force at its maximum, the point where the chains were most taut, where the physics were most visible. It was exactly the kind of moment she was there to experience. The ride had been assembled earlier that week and had only undergone a standard visual inspection. One of the chain assemblies had been replaced earlier in the season, but the surrounding connectors had already been exposed to repeated stress over many cycles. The damage wasn't on the surface. It was inside the metal, in the structure of the link itself. As the ride began, it rotated slowly before building speed. Witnesses described a completely normal cycle. The chairs extended outward, reaching full arc as the force pulled them away from the center. At that point, the chains were under maximum tension. This is exactly the moment Lyra had chosen the outer seat to feel. Near the top of her chain assembly, a connector link weakened by repeated stress and minor corrosion reached its limit, not from anything unusual, but from exactly the force the ride was designed to generate. The load it had handled hundreds of times before. This time, the margin was gone. The link failed. Her chair detached and followed a straight outward path. Based on positioning and speed, she traveled approximately 35 to 45 feet beyond the ride's perimeter before striking a fixed metal barrier post and then the ground. The detached seat frame landed separately nearby. The ride continued spinning briefly before the operator noticed the missing chair and initiated a stop. There was no warning before it happened, no visible change, no sound, no shift in how the ride moved. The moment it failed was indistinguishable from every moment before it. She was pronounced dead at the scene from severe blunt force trauma. Inspection identified the failure point at the connector link, progressive metal, fatigue, not sudden. Built up over time, invisible at the surface, undetectable without testing that wasn't required and hadn't been done. The ride was shut down and removed for further examination, and additional scrutiny was placed on inspection procedures for similar equipment. She was looking at the right thing, just not from the right side of it. Some failures take time to build, hidden in places no one thinks to check, but others don't stay quiet. They show up early, subtle, easy to dismiss. In the next case, it starts with something small, a flicker that doesn't seem worth stopping for. It was August 12, 2015, at a coastal amusement pier in New Jersey, where the air carried salt, humidity, and the constant hum of rides running one after another. The wooden planks beneath the attractions felt slightly damp from the ocean air, and the overhead lighting reflected faintly off surfaces that never fully dried. Even at night, the place stayed active, with rides cycling continuously and very little downtime between groups. Braden Glass was 21 years old, working a physically demanding job and visiting the pier with friends. From what was later shared, he documented everything, often recording clips rather than just watching. He wasn't focused on any one ride, just moving around and taking in the atmosphere. Eventually, they made their way to a bumper car attraction near the center of the pier. It was a covered setup with an overhead electric grid where each car connected through a vertical pole that maintained contact with the power source above. The system relied on consistent electrical flow to keep the cars moving. Earlier that evening, staff had noticed flickering in one section of the grid. This wasn't just a brief interruption. There were repeated surges where the current didn't fully drop, suggesting the system stayed partially de-energized instead of cycling cleanly off. It was subtle and inconsistent, not enough to stop operation, so the ride continued without a full shutdown. I've gone back to that detail more than once. A flicker noted, a ride still running. The kind of issue that doesn't look urgent, especially when everything at ground level still appears normal. And this is the point where the problem stops being hidden. During the ride cycle, a fault developed in the overhead grid. Witnesses described brief flashes above the cars, consistent with electrical arcing. What wasn't visible from below was that part of the system wasn't de-energizing. Sections of the grid remained live, unstable, and carrying sustained current instead of shutting down as designed. As the ride continued, several cars, including the one Braden was in, slowed and stopped beneath the affected section. Riders began stepping out once their cars stalled. That's a normal reaction when a ride loses power. From where they stood, nothing suggested the system above them was still active. No alarms, no visible warning, just stalled cars and a routine inconvenience. Braden stepped onto the slightly damp floor. As he moved away, he placed a hand on the metal frame of the car to steady himself, maintaining contact as his feet shifted across the surface. At that point, a live current traveled from the compromised grid through the contact pole into the car, and with the damp floor completing the circuit, it passed through his body. The reaction wasn't instant collapse. His body locked for a moment, muscles tightening as the current held him in place, preventing him from letting go before he dropped. Witnesses reported seeing him collapse near the car while sparks continued briefly overhead. Others began moving away as the situation became clear. The part that stays with me is how calm everything felt before it happened. People stepping off stalled cars, going through the motions of an ordinary inconvenience. Nobody had a reason to think otherwise. Staff cut power shortly after recognizing the fault, but the delay mattered. The system remained energized longer than it should have, allowing current to continue flowing even after the ride appeared inactive. In situations involving electricity, even a short delay can make a critical difference. Braden was unresponsive when responders reached him. He was later pronounced dead at the scene, with the cause determined to be electrocution. Several others were treated for minor electrical exposure. Inspection revealed that the instability in the overhead grid allowed unintended current to travel through multiple conductive points. Investigators concluded that moisture on the floor, combined with the electrical fault and delayed shutdown, created the conditions for the incident. Additional grounding measures and faster emergency shutoff protocols were recommended after. This one changed how I look at places like that. Now, I notice things. The damp floors, the hum overhead, the small signs that something might not be right. Braden's case is a reminder of what happens when several small things line up at once, which is why the next situation feels different, because this time, the danger isn't hidden in the background. It's right in front of you, and what happens depends on a single decision. We've got 5 of the most horrifying amusement park deaths ever recorded lined up, so hit that subscribe button if you want to see how thrills can turn fatal in an instant. It was May 27, 2018, at a regional theme park in Florida where the heat lingered even into the evening and the air felt thick with humidity. The constant movement of people kept the area around the rides crowded and active. Music, mechanical noise, and overlapping conversations blended into a steady background that never really stopped. Miley Troff was 17 years old, visiting the park as part of a school group. She was the kind of person who made herself easy to be around. Agreeable, low maintenance, never the one to slow things down. When the group moved, she moved. When they picked a ride, she got in line. That willingness to just go along had probably served her fine every other day of her life. That night it didn't. They made their way to a spinning ride near the center of the park, a cylindrical structure that pressed riders against padded walls using rotational force. Once it reached full speed, the centrifugal pressure was what held everyone in place. The restraint system was basic. The ride did most of the work. The ride had been running continuously since the park opened. One of the restraint sensors had triggered intermittent warnings earlier in the day, but the ride hadn't been shut down. As attendants climbed through the afternoon, loading procedures grew faster and less deliberate. The rhythm of a busy day had taken over. That detail kept pulling me back. It's not that anyone decided to cut corners, it's that the pace became the decision and nobody stepped outside of it long enough to notice. During loading, a staff member checked restraints. Miley's was noted and the cycle was cleared to begin. Nothing appeared unusual. She took her position against the wall and the ride started. But her restraint hadn't fully engaged, not visibly loose, not obviously wrong. Just not quite locked into the position it needed to be. As the ride built speed, the force pressed riders into the wall as expected. For most of them, it held. For Miley, the slight gap meant her body wasn't anchored the same way. As rotation fluctuated slightly, she began to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly, downward along the wall. She felt it happening. People on the ride noticed her position changing, but didn't immediately understand what they were seeing. From the outside, it wasn't readable yet. A warning indicator activated on the operator's panel, but that same indicator had flagged earlier and resolved on its own. The operator waited to see if it would clear again. It didn't. She slid below the point where rotational force could hold her properly. Her lower body drifted toward the seam where the rotating floor met the vertical surface, a pinch point not intended for rider contact during normal operation. Once contact was made, the motion of the floor took over, and the ride was still spinning. A second staff member spotted the situation and called for a stop. The operator responded immediately, but at that speed, the braking system needed time. Several more seconds passed. By the time the ride stopped, the damage had already occurred. She was transported for emergency care, but later died from severe crush injuries. Internal review confirmed the restraint had not been fully secured. The warning indicator had been active before the stop. The rushed loading, the ignored sensor, the delayed response, none of it alone caused what happened. All of it together did. It's one thing to trust a system as a rider, but it's different when you're part of the system itself. When you're the one expected to know it's safe. The next case doesn't happen during the ride. It happens on the track, in a gap where timing matters more than anything else. It was June 9, 2017, at a small amusement park in Indiana, where the air hung warm and still over a wooden roller coaster that creaked with every passing train. The structure stretched across the park like a lattice of aging timber, its tight curves and overlapping beams creating long, blind sections along the track. From the ground, visibility was limited, especially in the mid-course where the ride dipped low and curved back into itself. Once a train disappeared into that section, it stayed out of sight for several seconds. Caleb Rourke, 32, worked as a maintenance technician at the park. He had a reputation for handling problems quickly, the kind of worker who preferred fixing something immediately rather than shutting a ride down longer than necessary. Earlier that day, operators noticed a train returning slower than expected. It wasn't a full breakdown, but enough to call him in. The ride was stopped and the last train was held in the station while he entered the track area through a side access point. Standard procedure required a full lockout, a physical measure that prevented the ride from being dispatched. Instead, the system was placed in a temporary hold. It was a shortcut that depended on coordination rather than a physical safeguard. Caleb moved along the track, stepping over wooden cross ties, inspecting wheel assemblies and guide rails along a mid-course section. He located the issue, a minor alignment problem, and reset the component by hand. It was the kind of fix that didn't take long, which made the decision to keep things moving feel routine. Once finished, he began walking back toward the nearest exit platform. The structure around him narrowed the path, beams rising on both sides and limiting how far ahead he could see. At the control booth, operators prepared to run a test cycle. The section where Caleb had been working was completely out of view. Based on the timing and the assumption that maintenance had cleared, they moved forward. The train was dispatched. It climbed and entered the course under normal operating speed. As it moved through the layout, the sound carried ahead of it, the steady rumble of wheels over wood echoing through the structure. Caleb was still on the track, stepping into a crossover section where space tightened between support beams. By the time the train rounded the curve, the distance between them had already closed. There was no clear escape path. The surrounding structure restricted movement to a narrow strip beside the rail. The train entered the section and struck him before a stop could be completed. The emergency stop was triggered, but the braking system required distance to engage fully. The train came to a halt further down the track. Response teams arrived quickly, but Caleb was pronounced dead at the scene. The investigation later confirmed that no physical lockout had been used while he was on the track. The ride had only been placed in a temporary hold, allowing it to be restarted without a hard stop in place. The part that stays with me here is how uneventful everything appeared right up until the final seconds. There wasn't anything that would have made someone step back or hesitate. It all blended into routine. Everything depended on timing and assumption. One side believed the track was clear, while Caleb was still making his way off it. There was no mechanical breakdown forcing the situation. It came down to a gap in process. It's uncomfortable to realize how easily repetition can create a false sense of certainty. When a shortcut works often enough, it starts to feel like part of the system, even when it was never meant to be. And looking at how this unfolded, it's hard to ignore how routine it all was up until that point. This wasn't an unusual repair or a rare condition. It was a normal task, done the way it had likely been done before. In the end, investigators focused on that missing layer of protection. Not a broken ride, not a rare malfunction, just the absence of something that would have made restarting impossible while someone was still inside the track area. What makes this case linger is how preventable it feels when you trace it back. Every step followed a familiar pattern, and nothing in isolation looked serious enough to stop everything. But when those small decisions lined up, there was no buffer left to absorb the mistake. And the hardest part to process is how little separated a normal test run from what actually happened. The same track, the same procedure, the same timing. Just one person still inside the structure when everything restarted. No warning carried far enough. No barrier forced a pause. And once the train entered that blind section, there was no time left to correct it.